So, hi, Vianessa. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you here. So, I wanted to just start by allowing you to, I hate the word allowing, asking you. I'm
You're
not
giving
giving
me
you
permission.
permission. Yeah, I'm not giving you permission. If anything, you're giving me permission by asking you to just introduce yourself.
Sure, I'll try to be as succinct as possible. Hi, I'm Vianessa Castaños. I am an actor, writer, and producer, Renaissance woman, I guess that would be the equivalent nowadays. And I just live my life as best as I can. Hello.
Yes, a beautiful life. So we went before we started talking. I had said to Vianessa that one of the reasons why I wanted to bring her onto my podcast was that I've always from afar because you've been traveling the whole time that I've known you.
When did we meet for the first
It
time? Because
was
I know
20, and at
also
that point you had been
we
out of
hit the
college for a
decade
while.
mark.
I know, but I just remember that you were kind of on the go, and I was telling Vianessa that she helped me frame it, but that I've always admired that she had a very strong sense of self and resignated commitment to whatever it is that she was working on in the moment and just a freedom. I loved that energy, and I wanted that to be your voice to be a part of this conversation because there are other, individuals, other women who are like you, and sometimes they're questioning, like, should I be this way? Like, is there a positive
Hmm.
outcome for me? So
Yeah.
with that being said, I'd love to hear kind of your career story when you were really kind of coming into yourself, maybe in college, right out of college. Like, did you imagine that you would be where you are right now? So I would love for you to share.
Well, the answer to that question is yes. I have a very vivid
Yeah.
imagination, and yes, I am exactly where I anticipated to be. But that does not mean that the journey here was linear nor easy. So to go back to what you said, we met. Given the timeline, we met in my early 30s.
Mhm.
So we met at a time where I feel like we're always going through transitions, but that was a very significant transition. I've always had a very strong sense of self, and I've always said, well, this is what I'm interested in. And I literally came out of the womb telling my mom that I was going to be a singer and a dancer and an actor. I cannot sing. My dancing depends on the day, but I am an actor. So I've
Yeah.
been very much who I am forever. But life happens and hormones happen and you meet people and you are faced with different situations that you don't know if your life is going to happen the way you anticipated or hope, and you always have to adjust. And I'm really good at adjusting.
Yeah.
Like I said, I am where I said I was going to be, but it's far from linear.
Mhm.
So, the very beginning, I knew I wanted to work in entertainment, and that was very clear to me. And I also knew from the very beginning that I wanted to write. I've loved words. I've loved the written word. I've loved books since forever. I was born in the U.S., but I lived my first 5 years in Dominican Republic. So Spanish was my first language, and I went to the U.S. Not speaking English, and I became literally obsessed with words ever since then. By the time I was in the third grade, I was already speaking English. I was reading at an eighth grade level. I just loved words, and I loved
Yeah.
books, and I loved theatrics. And so that was very clear to me early on. I did some acting classes here and there, but I'm very much an introvert, and people don't believe me. So the acting classes were more of a way for me to actually associate with other people because I like silence, I like quiet, and I like to be with myself. And I've always been like that. I've always been like the kind of odd duck, the weird kid, but I had like this like diva inside that I showed only on special occasions. If I was on stage, great. If I was off stage, like, don't talk to me. Because it was just very, like, it was panic inducing to me to be around people, and it still is. And so I did that. It was kind of a goal, but hobby adjacent.
Yeah.
And when I graduated high school, what I wanted to do was move to Los Angeles. And my parents were like, well, no, because you need money. How are you going to survive? And I was like, well, no, because this is literally what I've said I want to do my whole life. And so they're like, just like go to school, go to college, and then get a job and like save some money and then move to LA. And I was like, oh, God, fine, I'll do that. I have to if you insist. And so I went to school.
Responsible decisions.
Yeah, no, responsible decision making. I'm not here for it. I went to school. I was very fortunate in that. So I actually started off as my major doesn't really matter, but I started off as a marine biology major because I like boats and I wanted to like live with fish. And I was like, well, I'm not going to act. I'm going to live on a boat. And then I switched to business because I've always had an interest in business, particularly show business. One side of me was the performer. Another side of me, I was like, well, I like writing. Maybe I'll write scripts someday. Maybe I'll produce someday. And mind you, when I was in high school, I didn't fully understand what it meant to be a producer. I just knew that it intrigued me because I understood that they were the ones who had like the final say in what was going to happen on TV, because I'm very much a TV person more than a film person. And so I was very fortunate that very early on, while I was in college, I switched to business major. I hated it. And I was like, do I really need to be a business major to know how to run a business? I met with a counselor and she was like, well, you know what? Your degree doesn't really matter. Your work experience does. And I was like, oh. And that was for me where the trajectory shifted. That was where I was very much like, okay, I am going to move to Los Angeles. I'm going to get some work experience first. I'm going to get out of this business major that I hate, but I'm going to get a job. This was like my sophomore year in college. I was like, I'm going to get a job when I get out of here in advertising, and I'm going to work as a copywriter because it's writing. And to me at that time, advertising was the closest thing to television without being in television, because I was in Florida. I didn't know where I was going to end up. I knew that I wasn't going to go directly to Los Angeles. So I knew like getting a job in an entertainment company wasn't probably like the most feasible option then. So to me, advertising was the next best thing. I'm going to work on TV commercials. That's what I decided. And so that's what I did. I graduated Florida State and I went to DC because my parents were living there with this grand plan of I'm going to live for free for like the next year, save all this money, and then move to LA. As soon as I got there, my parents were like, bye, we're moving. So now I had to become an. They went to California. They went to San Francisco or outside of San Francisco.
So wait a minute. You were going there to save up to Cali, and then they're like,
money to move to California, and then they went to California, and they left me behind. And so all this money that they thought that I was going to be saving with my big girl full-time job in advertising, which was nothing. I was making like I think $27,000 a year. That was my starting salary. Now all of it had to go to rent in DC. And mind you, that this was in 2000. Yes, prices have gone on vastly since then, but it was back then. It was also still very expensive.
It's still expensive, yeah.
So my plan to save money went totally out the window. And then I was like, I cannot believe that I am stuck in this city that I do not like, doing a job that yes was interesting to me because it was writing, but it wasn't what I wanted to do because I wanted to move to Los Angeles. And I was like, I can't. I'm stuck. I can't. And so I was there for 3 years. Didn't really save any money. Because, I mean, who can with rent, making $27,000 a year? And then one day I was like, I've had enough. I am going to Los Angeles. I packed my car. I cashed out my little 401k that I think at that point had $1,400. And I drove across the country by myself and moved to Los Angeles. And so that was like the close of chapter 1.
Yeah, I know.
Career chapter 1 closed.
So I'm going to ask you about chapter 2. So what was Cali like for you? Because a lot of the content creators that I follow kind of have this story where they ended up in LA because they wanted to pursue acting or whatever, it was comedy or whatever, and they get that reality check that a lot of the people serving them in the restaurant or at Starbucks are, someone with a dream to be a writer or director. Right. So what was that reality change? Was there a reality change for you, or you were just kind of kind of knew it was going to happen?
I mean, obviously there's a reality change because you're in a new environment. You're, starting over essentially.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a shock for me. For one, I was accustomed to moving because we moved around a lot when I was growing up. So there wasn't that sense of like, oh, I miss home because I don't have a home. I moved every 3 years, so there wasn't that. And then in terms of career, I had already spent 3 years working in advertising. So I had enough work experience to become a freelance writer, which is exactly what I did. And so there were some stints where, I worked at a restaurant for a little while because freelancing is freelancing, as we all know, or we at least know from stories. It's not consistent work. So you might have a contract, you might have a project. When that's over, you're constantly looking for the next thing and not everything overlaps, especially not in those early years. So there were some times where I did work at a restaurant. I was a writer. I started freelancing and I was working remotely. I think it was in so I'm very much a veteran of the remote work freelance lifestyle, but it was by design. Because at that point, when I had spent those 3 years in DC and I knew I was going to go to LA, I had already formulated in my mind, when I get there, I'm not going to be waiting tables. I am going to get writing work because I worked for the biggest Hispanic advertising agency in the Mid-Atlantic. And I worked for one of the top 2, my second job in that 3-year time frame in DC. I worked for one of the top 2 advertising agencies in the world. So I had the resume to be able to at least get some interest from people, get a little freelance work. And so that's how I did it. between freelance,
Mm-hmm.
random freelance writing clients. And I went to work for a plastic surgeon as well, for like 2 years, while also still freelance writing. So it was like a lot of gig work, but the base of that was, surviving thanks due to the foundation of my advertising job. So I guess
Mm-hmm.
thanks, mom and dad, for not letting me move to LA immediately.
And how long were you in LA for?
I was in LA for 11 years. Good years. LA was good to me. And I don't deny the fact that it is not an easy city. And I see and I understand why a lot of people go and burn out. And I did burn out eventually, but I think it was more exhaustion. But I didn't burn out in the sense of like, a big shock and like, oh my God, because I had a plan. I treat my life like a business plan. And every chapter of my life has had a business plan. I would sit there and I would say, okay, well, this quarter of this year, I'm going to take 3 acting classes. The next quarter, I'm going to take only one class because I don't have money. But also in that quarter, I'm going to book a job. And so it was always like giving myself goals. And there's a lot of things that are out of your control. But if it was something that I could control, like my training, my headshots, my publicity, which, all of these things cost money, which is why you need a job, why you end up waiting tables, because you always have to take acting class and your training is never done, and round we go. But if I could control what I could control, then the rest of the things would fall into place. And that was very much my approach for the 11 years that I was there. And I left LA on a high note. I left LA in, was it 26?
Mm-hmm.
At that
That's when you
point,
moved to Spain, right?
I just started traveling.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
So I started traveling, but I left LA that year. I had booked the Mindy Project. I had booked the People versus OJ Simpson. I was auditioning regularly for co-star roles, which are really like under 5 roles. And you have maybe 1 line, you might have 5 lines, but the auditions were starting to get bigger. Like I was at the point where you hope to get, where you're finally in your stride, where people know your name and casting directors will call you in directly. And it was great, but I was just burned out.
Yeah,
And
I
I
was
was
gonna
like,
ask like what
I
made
was
you
literally
decide.
burnt
Yeah.
out. Said it was everything is gig work, right?
Yeah.
Freelance writing is gig work, acting is gig work. You might get an acting job that's only one day of filming. You might get an acting job that's 1 week or 1 month. Great, but then you might not get another one for 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 6 years. And so it's like this constant state of doing gig work. That year that I left, I had booked 3 TV shows, which was fabulous, but I didn't have any freelance writing work. So like my money was just fizzling away,
Yeah.
because you really don't have room to save either in any modern city, but in LA at that time either. Um, and I was just tired. I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And I went and I was, how old was I? 34? I was 34. And I went and had a meeting with my manager. And I was like, listen, I've been with you guys for quite a few years. You know that I'm serious about my career, and was the first one to like miss all of my friends' weddings and all of, because you got to be around. The second you book a trip, you get hired on a job. And then
Yeah.
between that and actually not having money, because being a broke artist is real, um,
Yeah.
I missed a lot of things. And I don't regret it at all.
Yeah.
But I was like very serious about this. And knowing that I'm as serious as I am, you should know that I am serious when I say that I'm burnt out. I need a break.
Yeah.
And I was 34, and I literally looked at my manager and I said, I will come back to acting when I'm 40. I said, I'm taking the next 6 years off. And
Yes.
I sat across from them and I was like, I understand that, one, as a woman, two, as a woman of color, and many other things in the entertainment industry, there's almost like an expiration date. The older you get, especially as a woman, the more limited the roles are. And I'm like, okay, well, that has to change. So we'll see what we can do about that down the line. But also, I recognize that by leaving now on a high note, when I'm only 34, I could be shooting myself in the foot. I could be throwing away my entire acting career, throwing away the last 11 years of sacrifice and work and training and whatnot. But I feel like it's something I have to do.
The word courage came up for me because a lot of times people are looking for like the perfect scenario for them to make that pivot or to
Mhm.
shift whatever they're currently doing in their career. And I've encountered so many women specifically who are everything intuitively in their spirit emotionally is telling them it's time to go, but it's like, but here are all the good reasons why I should stay, right? And it's like I
Mm-hmm.
have to be at a point of just complete and total despair in order to make that pivot. And not to say that you feeling burnt out wasn't a breaking point,
I
but you
had
also articulated that you were doing well career wise with your, yeah, you're doing well career wise in terms of just starting to get a little bit more regular work. Someone would say, okay, well, just stick it out even longer. And so I have to acknowledge the level of courage it took to say, no, I know myself. I know that even though these things are going well, it's not what's best for me at this moment. And I have to be willing to take a risk on myself, even if it's not really a risk, right? Just invest in what's best for me. And I think you articulated that really well. Was it a test of courage for you to do that?
I think you could call it that in a way. For me, looking back, I feel like in the moment, I didn't feel like I was being courageous.
Mm.
For me, it was self-preservation. It was
Yes.
it was a very animalistic, like, I am not okay. I'm
Mm.
recognizing that I am not okay. And if I don't remove myself now, I am going to completely lose myself. I was not
Mm.
okay mentally. I was not okay emotionally. I literally had like a nervous breakdown, for lack of a better word, because I
Mm.
was just so overwhelmed, and stressed out about the inconsistency of life, of everything, because that's just the nature of that particular industry. It's very
Yeah.
inconsistent. And again, even working as any type of freelancer, it's very inconsistent. And so I had all of these inconsistent lifestyles that I was juggling and balancing pretty effectively for 11 years. But eventually it just, I don't want to say that it all came crashing down, but it kind of did. I didn't have money, or at least not consistent money. I was constantly stressed out about what I was going to pay, if I was going to be able to pay rent or buy food, or like make these decisions. That at that point I was 34, and I was like, oh my God. Because then, there's also the outward societal pressures, like, I'm a woman in
Yeah.
my 30s, and why am I struggling, and I don't have a house, and I don't have this. And also it was like this just like overwhelming, like, no,
Yeah.
I cannot handle life right now, I need to walk away.
Yes. That is so good. And just knowing, seeing where you are right now, I want to affirm that that was the right decision.
I have no doubt that it was the right decision now. I
Yeah.
mean, in the time you do it, like I said, it was self-preservation. And then what happened after, I actually went to my parents outside of San Francisco, and they were actually getting ready to move back to the East Coast.
Ah!
It's like, oh my God. So I left LA to go. My dad had already gone to the East Coast. My mom stayed behind to like pack up the house. And so I stayed with her, I think, for a few months, packing up her house. And that was what I did when I left LA. I wasn't working. I was literally just packing up my mom's house and like trying to heal emotionally or mentally, because after leaving LA, being at my mom's house was honestly probably the best thing for me, because it was just an emotional
Yeah.
spiral. It was, who am I? What am I doing with my life? If I'm not an actor, then what am I doing? I'm
Yeah.
not interested in anything. I spent my whole life pursuing this and I just walked away. Oh my God, I made a mistake. Oh, I threw my life away. I got to spiral in my mom's semi-empty house. So
Yeah.
I can't be mad at that.
Yeah, but you know what? You use the word spiral, but I think that that was a natural process that a lot of people go through. That just questioning our decisions, the unsurety. You talked about one of the things that helped you in those 11 years was just controlling the things you could control and try and not focusing on the things that you couldn't. And in that moment, what you could control was, this physical space that you were in. You had the privilege to
Exactly.
be in a space that you could be supported, and you could also control just how you were going to take care of yourself in that moment. I just love that you said that, because it just lets people listening know that it's okay to go through all those thoughts and feelings and emotions, right? Like, you're going to come out fine, and you have to in some
Yeah,
aspect.
you have to
I
feel
think,
all of the things.
yes, and I think sometimes we shame ourselves because we're just like, I should have myself together, and it's like, nah, no.
Nobody has it together. And the older I get, the more I realize nobody has it together. People might
Listen.
look at me now, I still don't have it together, because that's life. It's a constant ebb and flow, and you're constantly trying to figure out what's next and what works and what doesn't, and that's beautiful. Just let yourself explore all of it, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Just fall back
Yeah.
on something else.
I want to hear about like how you ended up transitioning into moving to Spain, developing your career. Because one thing I will say about you is that um, obviously because of the pandemic, a lot of people have developed a nomad lifestyle, right? Where you're,
Mm,
living in different places, because technology has allowed it, even though they working their hardest to bring us back into the office so they
they're
can,
really trying.
yeah, it's always about the money, but whatever.
But listen, I've been out of the office since 2008. You can be out of the office.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Like you were kind of ahead of your time in terms of just building a career on the go. And so I just love to hear like how that transition and how that you were able to eventually kind of settle in Spain.
Yeah, so I did the stint at my mom's house, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start looking for jobs in production because,
Mm-hmm.
again, I didn't want to get back in front of the camera because I said I wasn't going to do it until I was 40. And so I was like, I want behind the scenes job. Like, I want to work in production. And I started interviewing with media companies, particularly in like a lot of the jobs were for social video productions, script writing, things that were really in line with my interests and my resume at that point. And so I'd
Mm-hmm.
gotten all these really great interviews, and I would make it to the final round, and it wouldn't pan out. And more interviews kept popping up in New York, and so I kept flying from California to New York. And eventually, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to move to New York because it doesn't make sense for me to be flying back and forth. Let me go to New York. And so I did, and I stayed with a friend for about 6 months. Same thing, kept getting all these interviews. They were really great. Final round. I'm like, oh, internal hire. Final round. Oh, we got found somebody else. And I was like, yeah, I can't. Like, I just can't. I can't do this. So I was
Yeah.
like, all right. So I'm putting this whole I'm going to work for a production company thing on hold. And I'm going to go back to doing what I know how to do, which is freelance writing. So I started searching for clients. And at this time, I was like 2 weeks out from turning 35.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to my mom, and she's like, oh, you should go on a trip. And I was like, Mom, I am broke. I am living in New York on no money, looking for a job. Like, are you insane? Like, what are you even
Yeah.
saying? And she said the magic word. She said, I'll pay for it. And I was like,
Ha,
oh,
I know that's right.
well, in that case, happy birthday to me. I'm going to Spain. I decided to do the Camino de Santiago. And I talk about this quite a bit, and I feel so corny always talking about it, but it really was like a pivotal moment for me. So the Camino, I'm not religious at all, but the Camino de Santiago historically is like this religious pilgrimage that starts in France and ends up on the west coast of Spain. I did not start in France. I started in the middle of Spain, but it's essentially like a walk, a hike. You go through mountains and plains, and so over the course of 11 days, I walked. Was it 370 miles? Kilometers?
Wow.
No, kilometers. Oh my God. Wait,
Kilometers.
kilometers.
But that's a
What's
little
the
almost
miles?
200. That's still almost 200 miles, right? Because it's like
Kilometers.
2.1 kilometers to a mile.
Yeah,
So
it's
it's about
2.2.
almost 200 miles still that you did. That's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So mind you, I'm not a hiker, and I decided to do this trip literally like a week and a half, 2 weeks
Mm-hmm.
before I was supposed to set foot on this hike, and I was like, I guess I'm doing it. And I packed
Yeah.
my bag, bought some hiking boots, and I went and hiked across Spain by myself. And I was, oh, it is really pretty here. I was like, this is
Yeah.
really nice. This is lovely. This reminds me kind of like Oregon, California, but like cheaper.
Yeah.
This is great. And so I got back to the US. Like, I celebrated my birthday with like random people that I had met while doing this pilgrimage thing, which
Yeah.
was really nice. A very memorable birthday. It was great. And so I had this great, trip journey, and I really fell in love with Spain. And so I got back to the States, and I was like, I'm going to find a way to move to Spain. I don't know how I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
do it. And mind you, when I was doing this pilgrimage on my last day of my Camino de Santiago trip, I was flying out of Madrid the next day, but I didn't have a place to stay. And I called my aunt, and my aunt was like, oh, you can stay with my friends. My cousin Chloe was staying with this friend. She's like, Chloe's there. You can just stay. She won't mind having you. And I was like, are you sure? Because I'm all stinky after like 11 days of like hiking in the woods by myself. And so I went and stayed, and this woman's name is Begonia. And there's a point to this. Begonia was like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I just got done doing the Camino de Santiago. And she looked at me like I was insane. And I was like, yes, I am insane, but thank you. And she was like, so what do you do for work? And I was like, well, right now I'm looking for freelance writing work, aka I'm unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
But for the last 11 years, I'm a professional actor. I've worked primarily in TV, but I'm semi-retired. And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
semi-retired. And I was like, semi-retired because I said I wasn't going to act again until I was 40. And she's like, oh, wow, that's interesting. And she's like, well, you know what? I'm a talent agent. And
Ah,
she's like, why don't you send me your materials? Even though you live in the US, why don't you send me your materials? And, if something comes up in the future, I was like, when I'm 40, right? She's like, yeah, I'll just keep it. If something comes up that I think you might be a fit for, I'll let you know. I was like, okay, no harm. I don't know if you've seen the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey, where he's
I
like,
know I'm familiar with it, but I haven't seen it all of
okay,
it.
well, he's like cursed to say yes to everything.
Yes,
I'm this
yes,
woman. Like I will say yes to almost everything, and
yes.
that's my philosophy on life. I will say if an opportunity presents itself,
Mm-hmm.
yes. If you offer to pay for
Mm.
dinner, girl, guess what? Yes, girl, you're
Yes.
paying because I think it's rude to say no. So when opportunities present themselves, I'll do like a quick pro con, and if it's not something life threatening, I will almost always say yes.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, yes, I will send you my materials. And so I did when I got back to the States. And then when I got back, I also landed a freelance writing client. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. And it was remote and the pay was decent, not decent enough to live by myself
Mm-hmm.
anywhere, but decent enough where I could travel
Mm-hmm.
and like live for cheap in co-working places or hostels. And so that's what I did. So I got back to the state. I sent the talent agent in Spain my materials, and then I just started traveling. I went to Barcelona. I went to Egypt for a few months. I went to Palma. So I was nomading with
Yeah.
my $2,000 a month client because I couldn't afford to live in the States with that money, but I could
Yeah.
afford to live abroad. So that's what I did. And then eventually my best friend in Miami was like, oh, I have a spare bedroom. Why don't you come live with me? Yes, because I say yes to everything. So yes, even though I always said I would never live in Miami, but the opportunity presented itself. So yes, I went and I moved to Miami for a year, where I did a lot more writing. I got a lot of travel writing work. I wrote about food and culture for a lot of different magazines. It was a really cool, fun chapter of my life. I got to do the media thing, like press trips. I got a trip to Puerto Rico to write about hotels and sustainable travel. So I very much in this time was leaning into my writing expertise, since my acting was, I don't even want to say it
Right.
was on the back burner. It was just like, it was a layaway for the next few
Yeah.
years. And
It was
so,
on a
and I really wanted
pause.
to do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I really wanted to write. I was in a phase of my life, in this chapter of my life, where all I wanted to do was write. And I did. I wrote about travel. I wrote about culture. I wrote about food. I wrote about finances. I did a lot of interview pieces. I ended up getting a job as a producer, a scriptwriter producer for an online finance coach. So I produced and I wrote videos on entrepreneurship and how to start a business and finances. So I say all this to say that, like, a lot of times when I tell people that I'm an actor and a writer, like, they think that it's like these two different things. For me, it has always been very interrelated. Like, I don't
Yeah.
have one without the other, because one always fed into the other, and vice versa. And so this phase of my life was all writing. And then I suddenly get a call from the talent agent in Spain, and she's like, I have an audition for a job. The story took place in South Florida in real life. It was based on a true story. And so they were looking for Latin American actors. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll audition. Um, Mind you, it didn't shoot in Florida. But she ended up calling me a few days later, and she's like, oh, they want to see you for this role again. They want to do a callback, but you need to be in Madrid. And I said, well, you know what? Funnily enough, because when I was doing all of this writing, I actually ended up getting a job as a content writer for a startup in Madrid. And I was like, I'm going to be in Madrid next week because I'm starting this job with this startup in Madrid. And so I went to Madrid. I started the job at the startup, and I had like the audition like literally the next day. And like within a week, I realized that I did not like the job at the startup. It was not a fit. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, well, what am I going to do? Because I'm already like out here. And the universe decided for me, because I ended up booking the job on the TV show.
That's right.
So, yep. So I ended up leaving the job at the startup, which I think was best for all parties involved. It was a wonderful business that I will not name, but
Mm-hmm.
it just wasn't like, I wanted to do more creative writing work, and it was more of your standard like content writing, which was fine, but it wasn't what I was feeling at the time. But I ended up booking this acting job, and so that's how I ended up in Spain, because through this acting job, I ended up getting an artist visa, and I was able to stay in Spain while filming. And then after that was like the whole, okay, well, now that I'm here, I need to get more visas in order to stay, because
Yeah.
the artist visa is only valid for the time that you're working on the project. And then, yeah, so wow, that was like so long winded. But yeah, that's how I ended
No,
up
it
in
was
Spain.
not long winded.
I ended
Listen,
up in Spain with an
you
artist visa.
are, I mean, obviously, we know that you are a storyteller by profession, but just I'm just so enthralled right now. I wrote down a couple of things because I wrote down the word audacity, and then I wrote down moving by faith. And I think when you combine those two, you get these moments.
Yeah, yeah.
Begonia, just by chance,
And she's
your
still my
aunt's
manager to this day, by the way. She's wonderful.
wow. Your aunt's like, hey, stay with this person, or and then I'm a talent agent. You come back to the States, right? You get a freelance job in Madrid. She calls you and says, hey, I got an acting opportunity for you. Do you know what I'm saying? I think
Yeah.
a lot of times people feel like these scenarios that you described are like they only happen to certain people, and it's not that there was something like magical about you that created this circumstance. It was that you just allowed yourself to move really on your faith, not faith in the
Right.
dogmatic part, but just trusting that everything's going to be okay even when it doesn't feel right, you know. And that's why I feel like that audacity comes in, because we live in a time where, and I think this is a result of capitalism, it's very much like stay at this,
Mm-hmm.
don't go too far, you got to have a house, you have to have this, and it's very much like so that people are conditioned to feel like they have to work in a certain environment and do a certain job just to have survival. And the audacity comes in saying, no, I actually don't have to live under these conditions and be okay. I can actually use my talents, you know, have trust that if I go to a different place that I'm going to be okay, and I am okay. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. But I think it's more than that. I think
Mm.
I don't know if we think of like is it Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Is
Yes,
his name
yes.
Maslow? Or did I just make it up?
Listen,
Okay.
needs and values is one of the main
Okay.
assessments I
So
do
so
with my
Maslow's
clients. So
hierarchy
I'm
of
here.
needs, I think the base of it is safety, right? Like having,
Yes.
and so what has allowed me to be this way, and I recognize I was having this conversation fairly recently with a friend. I recognize that this is not the case for everyone, is
Yeah.
that safety in the sense that I am very fortunate that even though me and my parents did not see eye to eye for a very long time, when I got older and when they realized this is who I am and this is what I'm going to do, they became very supportive. And so my
Mm.
father, even to this day, will tell me, because things will come up with business or a trip, or I don't know if I should do this. My father to this day will tell me, just do it. The worst that can
Mm.
happen is if it's not going to work out. Same thing like with moving here, trying to get my visa, trying to get an apartment. He's like, if you don't get it and you don't have a place to live, you can always come back and live with us.
Yeah,
You can
that's
always come
true.
back from zero. And not everybody can say that. And so
Yeah.
because I've always had that safety net, I'm able to be audacious because I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
failing. So for me, I mean, yes, I worry about failing, especially because I like to do things right and I'm very competitive and yada yada. But in a realistic sense, I don't have to worry about failing because I have that
Yeah.
safety net, and that is very much a privilege that a lot of people don't have. And that's not to say it's not a question of economics because my parents are not rich by any means. It's having that emotional support, just having that unconditional, we are here, like your life is your life. And
Mm.
we, especially coming from two immigrant parents, which you can only imagine, you go through that phase of you got to be a lawyer, you got to be a doctor, you
Yeah.
got to be this, and if
My
you don't get
dad's
a
from
grade,
Trinidad. I get
you know,
it.
growing up, it was very much that, like, oh, I don't want to be a
Yeah.
disappointment. But once I grew up, it was like I don't even know how to describe it. It's like these two people evolved, and I was like, wow, people really can grow and change.
Yeah.
But I have the wonderful honor and pleasure and privilege of having these two people that are like, just go out there and do it. And if you do terrible, who cares? And if you
Mm.
fall on your ass, who cares? Just do it. I think they would be more disappointed in me if I didn't try than if I played it safe.
Yeah. I love that you said that because you're 100% correct. Privilege doesn't always come in the form of financial security. It can come in the form of emotional support, community, right? Having people that
Mm.
you can, even
Community
for
is so
me,
important.
community is very important. This last year, I went fully working for myself. And I have
Congratulations.
thank you. I have a
I'm
contract
very
that
proud
I
of you too, by the way. I've been watching your growth
oh,
and
thank
I'm
you.
very,
Oh, that
very,
makes me
very
feel
excited.
good.
Hence
I'm
why
proud
I'm
of
here.
myself
So
too.
a podcast, I'm definitely supporting.
Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I it was scary, and I had to kind of unlearn that coming from my dad, who was like, "You get a good job," and because when I got laid off last year, my dad was like, "Okay, so are you gonna start looking for jobs again?" And I was like, "I don't know if I want to do that." And so, where the privilege comes up for me is that I have a partner, I have a spouse, and he works full time, and so we work it out together. We put our money in the pot, but he's obviously carrying a significant amount, which he's fine with. But it allows, and so I thank him. I say, I really appreciate your support because it allows me to ebb and flow, and he never says to me or questions my decisions. His whole thing is he just wants to make sure that he has money that he can buy the things that he
Hey,
wants. And
Sam.
he's a really simple guy. My husband's on the spectrum, and so that kind of adds to him just being a really simple person. It's just I don't take for granted because I have a lot of friends who don't have that. And it's not
Mhm.
even like I have the financial part, just the emotional
The
support.
emotional part, it's so
Yes.
huge. And I don't have a
Yes.
partner, and I love my life, so it's definitely not
Yeah.
a
Yeah. You're
necessary.
not saying it like,
But
woe is me.
there are moments where it's like, after a long day, like it'd be nice to like just come home. And I don't even want to say vent, but just like come home and like share the space with someone and
Yeah.
like not have to call my mom, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's so many different dynamics, I guess, if you will, in terms of how to feel safe and how to feel supported.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
glad you have one.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, wow, this has been so great. I have a couple more questions, but I want to talk about your production company, some of the work that you've done, especially in the last, I want to say 3-4 years, and you received an award at the film
Yeah,
festival, right?
over the summer. Yeah. So again, we go back to my two careers are very intertwined. And I guess third career now that I also have the production company.
Mm-hmm.
So like I mentioned earlier, in terms of my writing work, even though I was focused like the last few years a lot on travel writing and whatnot, I was also working as a scriptwriter producer. Before I left LA, I'd actually had written and directed two horror shorts. And so I was, dabbling in production, not full time by any means, but on a freelance basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just very much driving home the idea that I really do want to be a producer. And what better setup do I have than being a writer and an actor? Like, I feel like those are the two things that go in hand in being a
Yeah.
producer in
Yeah.
production. Obviously, there's different types of production. I'm interested more in the development side, which is coming up with the ideas and the scripts and the concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And so, goodness, the past couple years, I ended up booking that TV show, En el Corredor de la Muerte on Movistar Plus, in case you want to watch. And I'm only in it for like half a second in like two episodes.
That's
But
okay
I
though.
since booked some more act. I turned 40 last year, and like
That's
clockwork,
right. We're both 82 babies.
yes, I kid you not, like clockwork, the universe was like, ding, ding, ding. Remember what you said 6 years ago that you were going to go back to acting when you were 40? Guess what?
Intentions.
Here's more acting work. And so, like, I just started booking work, and I was like, yes, in Spain, mind you. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. So, like, so far I've filmed a Netflix series. I have a series coming on Apple Plus with Eva Longoria, where it's actually a bigger role. I play her best friend in the series. That should be out early next year. And
What?
yeah, and I'm filming a very small role on an Amazon film. So, things are like once 40 hit, I'm telling you, this like business plan, this audacious business plan of mine,
Yeah.
it just fell into place. The crazy thing was I was still working as a freelance writer while I was doing this acting stuff. And at this point, my freelance writing got me to, I've been working with Meta for the past 3 years. So I've
Yeah.
been doing, I don't work for them. I'm not a Meta employee.
Yeah,
I am a
you're
contractor. Um, and so, like how cool is that? Like,
Yeah.
granted, opinions aside about social media and monopolies and, conversations that we can have at another time, it's really freaking cool to say that I work at Meta.
Yeah.
And so the beauty of it is now I'm still, I'm speaking now, but in the past tense, is that even a
Hmm.
thing? So then
Yeah.
now I was working at Meta, which was, okay, I can survive. I can pay rent and I can pay for all my visa processes and whatnot. And I have money from that job at Meta to invest back into myself. How am I going to do that? I am going to do what I always said I was going to do, and I'm going to open a production company. So I took the money that I was making from Meta and I did the processes, the legal processes to get an entrepreneur visa in Spain, which is a very difficult visa to get. They're usually reserved for tech industry because you have to present this business plan. And I was like, well, I have a television production company focused on creating projects that center diversity and people from underrepresented communities that nobody else is doing in Spain. And they're like, okay, that's good enough. I'm like, yes. So it got approved for my entrepreneur visa. And so that process of the legal process was one side. And then, well, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so in production, there's a lot of like markets and there's a lot of like industry events. And so when you pull the curtain and you're like, if you've ever asked yourself, why is it that rich white men tend to run the entertainment industry? Well, it's because these markets and all these events cost money.
Yep.
And so if you don't have the money, you don't go, you don't pitch your projects.
Yeah.
Guess what? I did have the money because I'm now making money from my other side hustle being a writer. And so I started going to those markets and I started doing that networking that I would not have been able to do strictly on the money I was making as an actor. So again, I say this to say, can't have one without the other. Vianessa is both.
Yeah.
And my goodness, I went to one market. It's called Series Mania. I went last year for the first time. And I had a couple meetings. I was pitching this project that I've been working on for a few years. And there was a gentleman sitting next to me. And I got done with my pitch and he was like, excuse me. He's like, I don't mean to eavesdrop, but that was like a really great idea. I really liked your pitch. And I was like, thank you. And, he's a man of color as well. And he's from the UK. And he's like, well, we literally are the only two people of color here. So let's stay in touch. And I was like, I appreciate that. Thank you. And so we part ways. And a few weeks later, he emails me and he's like, hey, I've been like playing around with this idea for this TV series with time travel elements, and it would have a female black lead. And I would love, your eyes on it. Tell me what you think. He sends it over. And I was like, well, this is a great concept. It needs some work in certain areas. Like it's very obvious that this was written by a man. And also like, there's just some things that to me, just from a cultural sensitivity standpoint, just don't work out. Yeah. And so I ended up being brought onto the project as the lead writer, and I've been working with him on it for the past year and a half. And we finally got to a place where we're like, you know what? Not because it's ours, but this is actually really good. And so we started shopping it around to production companies, and we got interest from an established indie producer here in Spain who's come on board. And we're like, okay, well, we're going to send it to these markets to like pitch because there's these opportunities to present your projects for prizes and whatnot. And it got picked for Connect a Fiction, which is a market that happens in Spain every summer. We got selected for the music section because the show is called Border Station, and it's actually about a Black Spanish woman who is a jazz singer. I'm giving you the quick rundown. Gets thrown back in time to 1941 with a Jewish girlfriend. And in order to survive, she has to take on the identity of a jazz singer, like a 1940s jazz singer who's very much akin to Josephine Baker. It's like that kind of.
I was going to say a Josephine Baker.
Yeah. So it's Josephine Baker inspired because it's like a time travel spy drama with jazz as the focus. And so we won the prize. We won for best music pitch, which was wonderful. And then I won the funnily enough, the project that my co-producer, his name is Anthony, the one who overheard me and brought me on board Station. So the project that he had eavesdropped on is a separate project. It's a comedy procedural about three friends who open up a private investigation agency. So that project has gone through many evolutions because I've been working on it for 7 years or so. Yeah. And that project actually won another prize this summer. But the following week, I'll be going to Cancun for another, it's called MIP Cancun, for a television market to try to pitch and sell that project there. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm very much in the throes of being an actor because I'm filming TV series. I'm very much in the throes of being a producer because I have these two projects that are being moved. They're being promoted and they've won some sort of recognition, and we're hoping that we get financing and whatnot. And then I'm still working as a freelance writer. So that's where I am.
That is beautiful. 'Cause we're sending you energy of rest, but still persistence and balance. That's the word we're looking for, balance. I love that you celebrated being in your 40s. I love being 40. I turned 41 on Wednesday. And
Oh, happy early birthday.
thank you. Well, no. This past Wednesday, so it's belated.
Oh, happy late birthday.
Thanks. And so I just felt like, so in Islam, the age 40 has its significance because the Prophet Muhammad first received the Quran when he was 40. And so it kind of represents a heightened sense of self, spirituality, and emotional maturity. And
Mm-hmm.
there's like a freedom that comes from it. And so when I turned 40, I still have moments, but I just feel like I handle them a bit better because I don't
Mm,
really try to handle them. And
right.
so, what I'm getting to is that if you're in your 30s listening to this and you're wondering, like, will my life be better? Yes. And so
Yes.
many
Oh
things
my
are going to
God.
happen that are
Yes.
amazing. Yeah, go ahead.
It's funny the age thing. Like another conversation I have with people because like society's always like the best time of your life is in your 20s, or like if you could go back to being 21, would you? Hell no. There is
No,
not enough money. There's not enough like time travel machine bribery that would ever get me back to
nothing.
my 20s. My 30s maybe, like my mid 30s was
Yeah,
cool. But honestly, 40 is great. I'm 41 now as well, and 20s
yeah,
not so much. So if you're listening to this in your 20s, just hang tight. I know you think your life is probably great. It gets better. So imagine
yeah.
that. It gets even better. If you're listening to this in your 30s, same thing.
Yes.
It's so
Yeah,
much
it gets
better.
better. And just release the pressure to feel like you have to have you have to meet certain expectations by certain age limits. Even I'm going through a fertility journey and it's been tough. And, a lot of times they say, well, you're running out of time and da da da. And I'm just like, I'm trying to make sure I get up every day. So I don't want to hear
Right.
about I'm running out of
Priority.
time. I'm living my life based on what I've learned for myself, based on how I trust myself. And you can apply that to when it comes to your career as well. You didn't
Mm-hmm.
just show up and all of a sudden you're living life. Like there were lessons that you've learned, the experiences that we've had, people that we've met that all contributes to our
Yeah,
foundation that we can depend on. We can depend on ourselves to show up because we've done it before.
absolutely.
Thank you so much. This was so good.
It's
Oh,
so great to see you. It's
good.
so great to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I started this podcast. I love being a resourceful person. And I wanted women to have a space where they could come listen to other women who are still very much in the journey, right? And just understand that whatever you're feeling, there's somebody else who has felt it, who is feeling it, who has experienced it, who is experiencing it. So you're not alone. And so, but I get so much joy and just it helps me so much more than I think than I anticipated. And I just love this. I just love this so much. So before we go, 30 seconds, I promise. Can you share any type of social or any type of public space that you want to share or anything like that?
Apple Plus, I think in 2024. I don't even have a release date yet, but
Okay.
rumor has it early 2020.
Okay.
The show is called Land of Women with Eva Longoria. So
So
re-up your
exciting.
subscription in time.
Okay, beautiful. And do you have a social media that people follow or no?
I do have. So I'm like the worst.
Okay.
I guess because I work in social media, I'm the worst at up like uploading and stuff.
Okay.
But Vianessa on Instagram. If you want to give me a follow, that's where you can find me.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you, Vianessa.
Thank you.